Charles Spurgeon, fiery preacher of yesteryear, once wrote, "If we do not preach the coming judgment and wrath of God, we do not preach the gospel at all." He says, that would be like a surgeon who didn't want to tell his patient that she is ill. He hopes to heal her without her ever knowing that she was sick. So he flatters her that everything's in perfect shape. Naturally, of course, the woman refuses the cure. Such a doctor would be a murderer, not a healer. And so are we. If we do not warn people about God's wrath and his impartial certain judgment of our every secret, and then point them to the good news that Christ offers forgiveness to repentant sinners as their only hope. Well, nobody can accuse us around here of never preaching the wrath or the judgment of God. 2 weeks ago, we looked at the wrath of God. Last week, we talked about the judgment of God as we continue in this series, working our way through the book of Romans. And so we preach judgment around here. In fact, earlier this morning, Jason said, your sermons came up on the road trip with the youth group the other day, and the word they had for your sermons was fire, which I am told is a good word. I preach fire and brimstone and wrath and judgment. Amen? Well, last week we concluded with a summary statement where Paul says of God's judgment, he does not show favoritism. In other words, we will all someday face the judgment of God. All of us, Jews or Gentiles, Adventists or atheists, Hindus or Muslim, doesn't matter. We will all be judged. I think of the old Armour hot dogs commercial. Any of you remember that? Where we might say, God will judge fat kids, skinny kids, kids who climb on rocks, tough kids, sissy kids, even kids with... You don't remember that. With chicken pox. All of us someday will be judged. And so now we continue where we left off last week. Paul clearly is anticipating objections from both the Jews now and the Gentiles. He expects the Jews to say, wait a minute, Paul. So you're telling us that our obsession to do the will of God, to follow all of his laws, and they took spirituality very seriously. The Jews would say, so you're telling us that none of that matters because we are all going to be condemned on the day of judgment anyway? Of what value then is the law? On the other side, Paul anticipates Gentiles saying, but hold on. How can God hold us to a standard and to a law that we don't even know about? Those are Jewish laws. It doesn't sound like a fair and impartial judge if he's going to hold us accountable to that standard. So from both sides, Paul is anticipating an objection. And so he sort of walks us through this. As we pick up now Romans chapter 2, we begin in verse 12. And this is theologically thick material that we're getting into now. And so what I've done, you'll notice there in your outline that I've broken it up into 3 simple paragraphs, and then at the top of each paragraph give you a summary statement of what Paul is really getting at, beginning with this first paragraph where in essence Paul is simply saying, look, the Gentiles are all guilty and they all need the gospel. Okay? So let's look at verse 12. All who sin apart from the law, that's the Gentiles, also perish apart from the law. And all who sin under the law, that would be the Jews, will be judged by the law. For it is not those who hear the law who are righteous in God's sight, but it is those who obey the law who will be declared righteous. He sounds like James here, doesn't he? James 1:22, do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves, do what it says. And Paul here is saying, what good is it to just hear the law or have the law if you do not, in fact, do what the law says? Indeed, when Gentiles who do not have the law do by nature things required by the law, they are a law for themselves, even though they do not have the law. So what Paul's getting at here is that even though the Gentiles may not have all the laws, at some level they still have an understanding of the law. That is, we all have a conscience, a sense of what's right and wrong, including the Gentiles. They show that the requirements of the law are written on their hearts. Their consciences also bearing witness, and their thoughts sometimes accusing them, and at other times even defending them. And so he unpacks this a little bit for us and says of the Gentiles, even though they may not have the law, they still, at some level, obey at least parts of the law because they have a moral compass. It was Mark Twain who once observed, man is the only animal that blushes. Have you ever thought of that? And the only animal that needs to blush. We are ashamed of things we have done. Instead of being able to look God in the face and even to look at one another in the face, we want to run away and hide when our conscience troubles us. This goes all the way back to the Garden of Eden, doesn't it? Where we want to run away and hide because we are ashamed. We blush, we're embarrassed because of what we have done. Whether you're Jew or Gentile, you still have a conscience, Paul says. So the bottom line is, look, all of the Gentiles who may not have the law, they're still guilty, and they still need the gospel. Okay? Now, we move to the next paragraph where Paul says, for the Jews, guess what? You're all guilty too. And all of the Jews need the gospel. Verse 17. Now you, who call yourself a Jew, if you rely on the law and boast in God, if you know His will and approve of what is superior because you are instructed by the law, if you are convinced that you are a guide for the blind, a light for those in the dark, an instructor of the foolish, a teacher of little children, because you have in the law the embodiment of knowledge and truth. Okay, Paul says, you have the law, and you teach others the law. But it's a very high standard. He says, be careful, you then, who actually teach others, you do not teach yourself. You who preach against stealing, do you steal? You who say that people should not commit adultery, do you commit adultery? You who abhor idols, do you rob temples? You who boast in the law, do you dishonor God by breaking the law? As it is written, God's name is blasphemed among the Gentiles because of you. Paul warns the Jews, you better be careful here. Because as you're judging all of the pagans, keep in mind, you're just as guilty as they are. Then he lists specific sins: idolatry, stealing, adultery, and so on. Brings to mind an old story. Night we sitting around my house, nothing to do, all night to do it, when someone suggested, I know, let's play Spin the Bottle. Now, you may remember the game from your childhood. As I recall, the way we would play is you'd spin the bottle. The girl had an option. She could either give you a peck on the cheek or she could pay you a nickel if she didn't want to kiss you. And so by the time I was 13, I owned my own house that I purchased with nickels. But because we were adults at this point, we had to change up the rules just a bit. So we decided, here's how we're going to play. We'll spin the bottle. Whoever it points to in the circle, you have to answer honestly a question that we would ask. And so we'd ask the question, spin the bottle, and then whoever it landed on had to honestly answer that question. So I thought it would be fun if we could play a round or two of Spin the Bottle together this morning. Are you excited about that? Are you excited about that? Okay, now, the thing is, this is only fun if everybody plays honestly. All right? So no cheating. All right, and I've got a list of some of the same questions that we asked that night, and I figured I'd just kind of keep score here, all right, see how we do. So the first question we asked that night was, have you ever cheated in school? All right, I need to see hands. Okay, all the kids at SVA, just keep them up a little longer so your teachers can get down your names. All right, that's most of us. I'm going to give you about a 70%, which is a higher percentage than first service. Yeah, so there you go. Just saying. All right, which means you're holier. You know you need God's forgiveness. And God's still working with first service. Okay. All right, second question. Have you ever told a lie? Wow, okay. That's everybody except the two over here. And I know you're lying, so I'm going to just give you 100%. You'd think about it. Have you ever lied? Have you ever downloaded software and you check the box that says, I have read all the terms and conditions? Have you ever checked that box when in fact you're lying? You did not read all the terms and conditions. Let's just be honest here, right? Okay. Have you ever stolen anything? Anyone? All right. You're doing very well over here, by the way. I'm very enthusiastic. I love that spirit. I'm winning this game. Yeah. Now, you think about it. You ever stolen anything? You ever been at 7-Eleven, filled a big gulp, taken a few sips, and then refilled it? See, that's stealing. All right, so have you ever stolen anything? That's all of us, isn't it? Have you ever cursed? Said a naughty word? All right, very good. Come on now, most of you are Cleveland Brown fans, I know. And if you haven't cursed, you should. Right? Okay. Have you ever had, like, a naughty thought, a lustful thought? Okay, you don't have to raise your hand, but thank you. You just sort of wink at me on that one. And because about half of you are guys, I know you're at least 50% here all right now. No. Paul is playing this same game with the Jews. He's saying, okay, you have your laws and you teach the laws. You hold them up, but how many of you have committed adultery, he asks. Especially when you think about when Jesus taught, if you even have a prurient thought, you have committed adultery. You know, how many of you have practiced idolatry? Like, have you ever put anything in higher esteem above God? Well, we have all done that, haven't we? So Paul warns the Jews, you better be careful, because his point here is all of the Jews are guilty and they need the gospel. And then he expands it even further to say it's not just the Jews, it's not just the Gentiles, it's all the Ketteringites too. I mean, he extends this to all of us, where he says we all need the gospel written upon our hearts. Because it's not just an external behavioral deal here. It really is an issue of what's going on in the heart. And when you keep score like that, then everybody's bankrupt. Nobody stands a chance on the day of judgment. So Paul goes on, if you look at verse 25, he says, circumcision has value if you observe the law, but if you break the law, you have become as though you had not been circumcised, speaking to the Jews. When you break the law, even though you have circumcision, it's as if you don't, because you break the law. So then, he says, if those who are not circumcised, speaking of the Gentiles here, keep the law's requirements because they have some kind of a moral conscience, even if the Gentiles keep some of your laws, will they not be regarded as though they were circumcised? So what Paul's doing here is he's just kind of mixing and matching behaviors and practices and laws and nationalities, Jews, Gentiles, and he's mixing them up to say, look, whether you're a Jew that breaks the law or a Gentile that keeps the law, it doesn't matter. To think that you would someday stand in the presence of a holy and perfect and righteous God and think that somehow you have enough law-abiding good works to get you through that day of judgment, to think that much is preposterous. Like, it's not even, it's just way beyond. You have no sense then of the judgment and the righteousness of God. It would be a little bit like this. Imagine 3 swimmers who decide they want to set a world record, get in the Guinness Book, by swimming from Los Angeles to Australia. The first swimmer has never been in the water before. So, as you would imagine, he gets about 20 yards from the shore and goes down. He drowns. The second swimmer is actually a WSI, water safety instructor, certified. So he teaches lifeguards. Very good swimmer. He gets 5, 6, 7 miles doing really well, heading to Australia, but gets about 8 or 9 miles out there and then just drowns in exhaustion. Can't go any further. The final swimmer is a gold medalist, world record holder, one of the best swimmers in the world. He swims past where the first swimmer went down, well past where the second swimmer went down. He's doing very well. But of course, as you can imagine, it's not too much longer after that, and he too drowns. He doesn't even get to Hawaii, which is not even a third of the way to Australia. Yeah, to think about swimming to Australia is craziness. Nobody can do that. And that is what Paul is saying to all of us, whether you have the law or you don't have the law, or you were born into the Jewish community or whether you weren't, whether you're pagan. It doesn't matter. The whole thought of it is ludicrous. And so he says, we all need the gospel written upon our hearts. The one who is not circumcised physically, that is, of course, the Gentile, and yet obeys the law, will condemn you who, even though you, that is, the Jew, have the written code and circumcision, are a lawbreaker. A person is not a Jew who is one only outwardly, nor is circumcision merely outward and physical. No. A person is a Jew who is one inwardly, and the circumcision is circumcision of the heart, by the Spirit, not by the written code. Such a person's praise is not from other people, but from God, the only hope we have, friends. By Christ's Spirit in us, that we stand in the righteousness of Christ on that day of judgment. One of the very first articles I ever got published in a legit magazine, this was many, many years ago, back when I was in college, was actually a parable that I wrote on assignment based on Romans chapter 2. So I thought that we'd just close with this old parable. It sort of captures what Paul's talking about here. I felt like a rag doll in the dryer's spin cycle. Desperate to feel better, I made an appointment with Dr. Law. "It's your heart," Dr. Law growled with the compassion of a bulldog. "My heart?" I said. "Well, we don't have any heart trouble in my family. Aren't you going to diagnose me?" "No diagnosis necessary. It's your heart." "But my heart's never given me problems." "Maybe it's my feet. They've taken me to liquor stores and nightclubs." "It's your heart," he said. "Well, doctor, at least look at my hands. These hands, rolled dice, played cards. This is the problem." "It's your heart." "Well, at least examine my ears. I mean, I've listened to dirty jokes and gossip and profanity and enough rock and roll to kill the Rolling Stones. It's got to be my ears." "It's your heart," he said. There's plenty of great doctors in this city. I stormed out of his office. And for the next 10 months, I bounced from doctor to doctor, faithfully performing every prescription, yet never feeling healthy. Dr. Religion prescribed a regimen of baptism, church attendance, and tithing. Dr. Diet blamed my eating habits and suggested a menu of tofu, tree bark, and fried chick. Dr. Begood stripped my rings and bracelets and helped me to stop going to movies. While every doctor promised a cure, nothing could quiet the gnawing emptiness that ached within. In despair, I returned to Dr. Law. "It's your heart," his first words. Yeah, I barked. "So, what do I do?" "Well, of course, you need a heart transplant." "Oh, well, glad it's nothing serious." Well, he said, "heart transplant or death." His words cut like a scalpel. "Okay, I'll let you do the operation." "Oh, I don't do the operation," he said. "That's what I have a partner for. Come, follow me." He led me across the hall to Dr. Grace's office. "You ready for the operation?" Dr. Grace asked kindly. "Well, relax. I've never lost a case. Okay? But please, I'm a wimp. Give me a double dose of anesthetic." "Oh, no," he said. I don't use that stuff. You need to be awake for this operation." Even my toenails sweat as he made the first incision. Suddenly, the odor of pure manure filled the room. I grabbed a pillow to breathe through. "What is that disgusting smell?" "It's your heart." "My heart?" "Yes, you can smell all the dirty jokes and the gossip and the lust and all of it is collected right here in your heart. I guess I really do need a new heart." By the way, how much does a heart even cost these days. Not seen any good heart sales recently. $26 trillion, he said without looking up. 26 At $50 a month, how much, how long? Oh, no. You'll never pay for it, he said. A friend is taking care of it for you. Making his final stitch, Dr. Grace looked up there. How does that feel? Well, I feel better already. Well, you'll feel even better with exercise. Exercise? Oh, yes. Dr. Law and I are firm believers in exercise. Like the other doctors prescribed? Well, in a sense, said Dr. Grace, exercise is critical, but only after you have addressed the heart of the matter, which of course is a matter of the heart. My mind swirled. About that friend who donated his heart for me, who paid for this, could I meet him? Oh, most certainly, Dr. Grace smiled. But you need to know something. In order to give you a new heart, his was crushed. So don't be surprised by the ugly, gaping scar in his side.
shall never lose its power till all the ransomed church of God are saved to sin no more. Are saved to sin no more. Are saved to sin no more. Till all the ransomed church of God are saved to sin no more. And all the ransomed church of God are saved to sin no more. Are saved to sin no more.
Hashtag take church home. If you ever wonder what did they talk about in church today, just go to Twitter and you get the teaching in a tweet on the day of judgment. All of your good deeds won't help you. All of your misdeeds won't hurt you. The only thing that will matter is this: have you asked Jesus to stand in your place? Oh God, I pray your blessing upon each of us now as we leave to live and love like Jesus. In your name, amen.